The true character of a society is revealed on how it treats its children. This quote is by Nelson Mandela. I found it very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. I told you we would do a 3-part series on child abuse, neglect, and methamphetamine, and today is going to be our second case. We are going to dive deep, and when I say dive deep, we're gonna go to Georgia, in a little tiny town right by Atlanta. I love Georgia, I really do. It's such a beautiful state, and there's so much history there. There's a lot of horrible history, but there is a lot of history. I spent a lot of time in Savannah, and the area that we are going to be talking about is 2 hours away. It's called Covington, Georgia. So if you actually do take the time to look up a lot of the information or the footage of the case, their accents will be very, very thick, and it's just pure Georgia. So let's dive in. This is Detroit Allycat. Welcome back to my channel. I would love if you sat down with me and enjoyed or learned about a case you might not have ever heard. So without further ado, let's get spooky. So where do we begin? Many times they say that when you tell a story, you have to tell the beginning of the story, how it started, what happened. And that's very difficult for this story. I'm not sure many families live like this in the South. I'm not going to say it's a normal thing, but what we are going to talk about is a bit taboo. So Christopher Mcnabb and Courtney Bell, they were together. They were not married, but they were together. And the thing is that they lived in a trailer park. And there are some very nice trailer parks. I mean, they almost look like a little tiny community with little tiny houses, and some of them are quite beautiful. But when you talk about trailer parks and the stigma of, oh, he's from the trailer park, this is the type of trailer park that would be on the very end of the spectrum. This is it was just not a pleasant place. Georgia is very humid, extremely humid, and if you're going to live in Georgia, you have to have air conditioning. And unfortunately, in these trailer parks, it's very common for nobody to have air conditioning. And you would think that that would be like, so what? They don't have air conditioning. But that just tells you how they live. Because if you're living in a neighborhood that's around 95 to 97 degrees on a daily and they don't have air conditioning, and their humidity in Georgia is incredible, and they have something called gnats, and they're these little tiny bugs, and they are very, very, very annoying. Going back to Christopher Mcnabb and Courtney Bell, they were 2 younger people. Now, the interesting part about Courtney Bell is that her mother's brother, is the father of Christopher Mcnabb. So, you heard me right. They were actually cousins, first cousins, and that is an extremely taboo thing here in America. And there comes with a lot of health problems and all kinds of things that happen, but regardless, they were cousins, and they knew that they were cousins. And also that this family, they lived in this trailer park, everybody knew everyone. It seemed like the aunt lived down here, the sister lived over there, the grandfather lived over there. Everybody knew everybody. And a problem in this trailer park was meth. I'm trying to figure that out. If I'm going to be in a situation that's miserable, I'm going to do everything I can to get out of that situation. but sometimes things happen, you're raised a certain way, and that's just the normal. I don't know who got Christopher Mcnabb addicted to meth, but he was. I do know that he's the one who introduced Courtney Bell to meth, as he testified on the stand. When Courtney Bell introduced Christopher Mcnabb to her father, they lied and said that he had a different last name. The father did not know that Christopher Mcnabb was her cousin, or so he claims, which I don't understand, but they have so many cousins and sisters and brothers and nephews and uncles that I guess it could get kind of confusing. Courtney Bell had a mother who had 7 children, and out of all those 7 children, she only had custody of 2. So Courtney Bell's father actually raised Courtney. And out of all the testimony that I saw on the stand, Courtney Bell's father seemed to be the most level-headed. He seemed to actually be a very good person. And he truly loved these children. So Courtney Bell and Christopher Mcnabb had 2 children. She had a 2-year-old and she had a 2-week-old. The one we're going to be talking about today is Kalia. Kalia was 2 weeks when the incident occurred. 911 received a phone call and they got a message from Courtney Bell, and she said, "My baby is missing. I don't know where my baby is." And you can hear the 911 operator trying to get more and more information. And what most we see is from the cam that the police officer is wearing. The first thing that you realize is that going into the trailer park, the trailer is about maybe 500 to 750 foot square long. It's a very, very tiny little trailer park. And the first thing that happens is a very frantic Courtney Bell runs out to greet the police officer. And you immediately notice that she has a black eye. She's upset. She is trying to dig through the trailer, and you can tell that the police officer feels very uncomfortable. They don't know what to do because the place is so tiny. If I was in that place, I would feel extremely uncomfortable, almost claustrophobic. There are clothes everywhere. There's piles of stuff everywhere. I mean, it's just not a nice trailer. In one of the rooms, there's a big mattress, and then there's a little mattress. And I believe what appeared to be is a bouncer, and that is supposedly where the baby stayed. And she said that she woke up and the baby wasn't there. She said she actually woke up to her 2-year-old crying and saying that Kalia was missing and she couldn't find her. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, is that Christopher Mcnabb is not at the scene of the crime. We'll call it the scene of the crime. The baby is missing. So they ask her, "Where is Christopher Mcnabb, the father?" And she says, "He's not here." And they say, "Well, where is he?" And she says, "I'll call him." "Why wouldn't he be there?" And she said, "He went somewhere to go look for her." Which is very suspicious, because if you have a child missing, you're going to wait for the police officer to get there to answer all the questions. You want to get through that so that they can eliminate that you are the one that actually did something to the child. And then once they go through that process, they can go ahead and try to find your baby. As it turns out, Christopher Mcnabb actually was coming back to the trailer right as the police officer was coming to go find him. He said, "Well, where were you?" And he said, "I was looking for the baby." And he seemed to be very concerned. He was a little bit nervous, and they asked him why he was nervous, and he said he had a warrant out for his arrest. He didn't like police officers. They scared him. You could just tell something was off. Also, Courtney, she was constantly smoking. She seemed very on edge, as you would be if you had your baby kidnapped. And they're trying to ask, like, where could the baby be? And she's like, I thought that the baby could be with my dad. So I called my dad and actually asked if he had the baby, which I'm unsure of how that happens, because how do you lose track of your baby? For whatever reason, the father of Courtney Bell came there, and I believe he actually made a 911 call too, because he was scared that his grandchild was missing. I guess he had been kind of worried about the baby from the beginning and had already watched the baby 2 times out of the 14 days that Kalia was alive. 2 times. Now, for most mothers, you'll know that that's like kind of bizarre, because when a mom just starts to have a baby, you don't want to let people around your child. You're worried about germs. You are concerned about who they're going to be around. If you're a young mother, you're very like nervous. It's all new and stuff like that. So for Courtney to have had her for 2 weeks, and already the baby has been somewhere overnight for 2 nights, it kind of raises a red flag. So they check all around. They're looking all around the place, and they don't find the baby. So they search until the nighttime, and they decide that they're going to come back the next day and actually go ahead and do the search the next day. Courtney's first child goes with her father and spends the night there, and Courtney and Christopher end up going with Courtney's cousin, and they spend the night at their house. This couple has 7 kids. I guess they are okay with them coming over there. I guess Courtney is very upset, inconsolable, but they talk about how Courtney wants to get high on meth. And the next day they wake up, and the first thing Courtney wants to do is go to a meth dealer's house and get high. So, I don't know. That wouldn't be my first, thought, is to get high on meth, but while my missing baby, we're going to go look for her. But that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to go, and she wanted to go get high. So Christopher stayed with Courtney, and the cousin and the cousin's fiance went to the search party. And somewhere around that time, someone actually found a bag in a back trail, and they called the police officers to come look at the bag, and inside of the bag was the little baby Kalia. The bag was actually Christopher Mcnabb's, and there was some of his clothes inside of the bag as well. So somebody called Courtney and Christopher, and they were actually driving somewhere, and Courtney's mother was driving them. And basically, Courtney's mother said something to Christopher about how they found the baby, and the car stopped, and Christopher got out of the car and just took off running. Later on, he just says that Courtney's mom was scaring him, and he was just afraid. Now, the thing about Christopher is that he's had a really hard past, a very, very hard past. His face is covered in tattoos, and I mean they're rough looking tattoos. I like tattoos, but these are obviously prison tattoos, or a needle and poke tattoo, and you can tell he just had a very hard time. And when I was researching the case, I looked up his criminal history, and he had been in and out of prison for most of his life. It just stuff like robbery, drugs, things like that. And so he spent some time in prison and jail. So if I was in that situation, I would be afraid too. I'm not saying that I don't think that he didn't do it, but he taking off and running, he could be automatically thinking, they're just going to assume that I did it because look at the way I look. And if you see pictures of Christopher Mcnabb, He does. He looks like a dirtbag, and I hate to say that, but when you get face tattoos, you have to be very, very careful because you're instantly going to be judged, and especially getting face tattoos that look like they're gangster or like gang affiliated, or they look like they've been done in prison. Like, that's your face. So he had them, and they weren't very good tattoos. So he took off running. But the redeeming thing is that he actually came back to the police. And they arrested him, and they took him to the station, and they sat down and they talked to them, both the couple. At this time, Courtney wasn't arrested, just Christopher. And, they actually recorded them inside the cell talking to each other, which I really didn't get any kind of information about what, like, they didn't really talk about the baby. But what did happen is that while Christopher was in jail waiting for his trial, he ended up calling Courtney. And she basically said, like, you know what? I know you did it. It was you. It was in your bag. And she has such a thick Southern accent. It's very, very hard to understand. But this is where I get very, like, confused, I guess, because you can literally hear in his voice he didn't know what was going on. And she's like, well, they found the baby in the bag. And he's like, what bag? And she's like, the bag. He's like, no, I don't know. And then he kept, like, telling her, he's like, I didn't do this. He's like, I know that you know that I didn't do this. And I gotta tell you, for being in a situation that he's in, I can't see him having very good acting skills. He really does sound very, very convincing that he had nothing to do with this. I'm going to link that so you can hear it and you can make that judgment for yourself. The thing is, though, is that when you start doing meth, you lie. You lie a lot. And there are some other factors that came out in the trial. So the thing is that they said that they had somebody over the house the night before, and they had smoked meth with them. The person said that the baby seemed fine. The baby looked happy. They also said that Christopher Mcnabb seemed happy to be a father, and that's testimony that's given. However, there's another person that gave testimony, and this is one of Christopher Mcnabb's father's friends. I know, it gets a little twisty at times. And they end up, like, hanging out, and they say, well, why do you and Christopher Mcnabb hang out? And he says, we do drugs together. And this man testifies that he beat Courtney Bell a lot, and he even beat her when she was pregnant. He said that, he had been around when Courtney went into the hospital to have the baby, and basically Courtney called Christopher and said that they needed to have the place cleaned up for the new baby, and so he was there helping clean the place up. And there's just so many, like, fights and, like, screaming. They go to the hospital and they come out with the baby, and then they go home and then they smoke more meth. I don't know how the baby survived for 2 weeks, to be honest. She did, and it's really interesting because when you see the footage in the front room when the police officer first walks in, there's a couch, and when I say couch, it's more like a love seat, but there's a big hole in the wall, and I couldn't stop staring at that hole in the wall, because when they do the autopsy of the baby, the way the baby died was blunt force trauma to the head, to the brain. The brain matter was liquefied, which means that the baby probably got punched. That's just so sad. But That's how the baby died. And there is more testimony by Christopher Mcnabb's friend. He said that the night before, or the night before, he was over there with Christopher Mcnabb and they had done meth together. And the next morning, Christopher Mcnabb texted him at 8:30 and said he was wigging or tweaking out. The thing is that Courtney says that she didn't wake up until 10 or 11 and the baby was gone. And Christopher says he woke up at the same time that Courtney did. But if he was texting his friend at 8:30, that's not true. He was up the entire time. He also said that Christopher Mcnabb, asked his friend to come pick him up, and he said that he had to go take something and drop it off. And he said that he had a bag, and he said that he had to go down a trail and drop off a bag down the trail. And it sounds very like suspicious and right before the baby goes missing. And so that's the testimony that this man makes. However, this best friend, you find out, has a criminal history, and they do a deal with him, basically saying, like, if you go up there and you testify this information, then, we'll cut you a deal and you won't get in trouble for this or that. You know how prosecutors can do that. So you can't tell if he's telling the truth. And at one time, the defender actually asked him, he's like, have you, lied on stand before? And he's like, yeah, I did. But it wasn't about dropping off a bag or a dead baby. So you can't really tell who's telling the truth. And during the whole court testimony, it's actually very sad, because a lot of the family and these children, they're impoverished, and it just doesn't seem like from the beginning they have a chance. And the thing is that these people, they don't have like 1 or 2 kids. They have like 7, 8 kids. Like, I couldn't even imagine like raising that many kids. Courtney Bell herself is, I believe, around 19 or 20 years old when this happened. So she's already got 2 kids at this age, and with her cousin. At the end of the whole court, the judge is like talking to Christopher Mcnabb, and he's like, do you have anything to say? Christopher Mcnabb goes on this huge, horrible, like, tirade about, like, all these people have been lying about me on the stand and all this stuff. And he's like, listen, I don't want you to sit up here and just go off on these people. I'm about to sentence you. Is there something you want me to know? And he's like, well, you're not going to listen to me anyway. And the judge says, well, you don't know that. Tell me. And he's like, I'm innocent. I didn't do it. And he goes, well, if you're innocent, what do you think I should do if I find the man who did this to your child? And he goes, if you ever find the man that did this to my child, he should have life in prison. No getting out, ever. And he was like, well, sir, I sentenced you to life in prison and no getting out. And then Courtney goes up and she basically starts crying, and she's like, I didn't do this. You guys know I didn't do this. The judge is basically like, he kind of admits to her, like, I don't think you did this. But when you take a baby and you put it in a snake pit, the baby's going to be bitten by the snake. And he said, you allowed your child to be around this man, and you knew he was dangerous because he beat you. And now this baby is dead. So you put this baby in an environment that the baby could be hurt. So she actually was given 15 years in prison, which I don't know if I think that I agree with that, because if you listen, you really, really have to listen to the phone call where Christopher Mcnabb actually talks to Courtney Bell. There's something about that phone call where he just sounds like he's so confused. And he admits that he beats her. He admits it. And he's like, yes, I have domestic issues with her, but that doesn't mean that I beat my children. You guys can't prove that I've ever beat my children. And when they asked Courtney Bell on stand if he had ever beat the kids, she said no, but she is a battered woman. Is she going to tell the truth, or is she going to lie and do whatever he wants? Drug addict. So is he going to tell the truth, or is he going to just say whatever it is to get himself out of trouble? Courtney Bell's first daughter was supposed to go to her father, who very, very much wanted her. I believe his name was Tim Bell. But Courtney Bell got mad at her father for some of the testimony that he had, basically saying that he was worried about the children. He didn't think that it was a fit place to be raised. So Courtney Bell made sure that her daughter would not go to her father, and her daughter ended up in foster care, which just tells you a little bit about this person, that revenge was so much more important to her than her own daughter being with her family. And it's really interesting because you can actually locate some of these profiles on Facebook and see them. And they're all very messed up. They're addicted on meth, and the way they live, it's just very sad. One person said that they actually went to the memorial that they put up for Kalia. They wanted to go put some stuffed animals and some teddy bears, to give a memorial for this little girl. And they said it was shocking how horrible it was there, and how it just seemed like there were so many children running around and screaming and not being taken care of, and nobody cared. No one was paying attention to these children. Also during this time, while this was all going on and Christopher Mcnabb was in prison and Courtney was out, she was posting pictures on Facebook saying that she was single and talking to another man. And then one of Courtney Bell's friends made a GoFundMe for the baby for the, funeral, which I understand, but actually I believe some church group or some kind of group raised the money for the baby to get a funeral, and whoever created the GoFundMe was just pocketing the money. And there ended up being 3 or 4 different GoFundMes that popped up, and people were just trying to get money off of this poor little baby's death. This story is just very there wasn't very much coverage of it, because I feel like it was just hidden because no one cared. These people didn't have a lot of money, so they weren't high profile. It just was hidden. But I mean, a 2-week-old baby died by blunt force trauma to the head, and not but a half a mile away, thrown away in a bag in the woods near the trailer park. And the trailer park's still there with all these children in there. I'm hoping that by bringing some light to this situation, that you people that watch this channel will actually think, that if they see something, they should call. I hope you enjoyed my story of Kalia Mcnabb. I wish I had more information about it. Christopher Mcnabb will be in prison for the rest of his life with no chance of parole. And Courtney Bell will be out in 15 more years. Hopefully she will have changed her life. You can look up their profiles in the Georgia corrections. I wish that, when these situations happen, that instead of bringing these children home into these neighborhoods and into these situations, that they don't ever have a chance, that they give their children an opportunity and think about adoption, which there are lots of parents out there that would love to adopt children. If you would like to subscribe to my channel, I would love it. I'd love it if you stuck around. Subscribe, leave me a comment, tell me if you've ever heard about this case before. So thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope I didn't say that 13 different times. As always, stay safe and stay spooky.